The media literacy project I just completed was an invaluable experience for me, and I feel as if I learned a great deal about media literacy in our community. For example, I had to look up um, media literacy education in our area and programs in our area, and I actually was really unable to find much in terms of media literacy education in southeastern Wisconsin. How I secured my interviews. Two of the teachers that I interviewed, I had had previously, one in high school and then one also in middle school. So it was pretty easy to touch base with them. The student that I interviewed that goes to UW La Crosse was a friend of mine in high school. So that's how I secured her. I interviewed my boss for the parent section and his daughter. And then for the librarian, I was able to get in touch with somebody that's a classmate of mine. And then for the educational support personnel, my dad's wife works at Bullen Middle School, so she was able to get me in touch with somebody there. So it was a pretty easy process for me to find interviewees. In terms of resources I used for the project, most of the information and knowledge that I used came from the article from the Center of Media Literacy. But I also used the article Children, Adolescents, in the Media, which was the last one I read before making the project. I found valuable information in that one as well. So I kind of tailored both of those to help my knowledge. And then I also used some of the knowledge that I had gained from researching media literacy programs in the community. So I kind of combined all of that to tailor into my lesson plan. Overall, I think the project went really well. I was able to learn a lot from my different interviewees, and I was actually surprised by some of the lack of knowledge of media literacy. And that's not an insult to insult any of my interviewees. It's just I kind of expected more of a knowledge of what media literacy was or is, and it seems that the educate, like for example, the student that I interviewed at UW La Crosse, she had never heard the term media literacy until I reached out to her, which I was surprised by considering that she's supposed to graduate in May. So I would have guessed they would have taught that at some point, but they never did. In terms of the lesson plan, there wasn't a whole lot I changed for each interviewee. More or less, they were pretty much the same. The questions obviously changed depending on the interviewee, but I did ask the same questions at the beginning for pretty much each person. I would ask the definition of media literacy, and then I also asked if media literacy education falls more on parents or teachers. So I thought that provided me with useful information because I was able to compare and contrast the different answers. And then I also adapted the lesson plan a little bit for my child interviewee just to make it a little bit easier to understand. Um, but overall, I felt that the lesson plan was effective and people really understood where I was coming from. So I thought that the points that, I made it short and sweet. I kind of made the words necessary on the lesson plan a little bit more limited, and then I kind of expanded off of that. And I thought it worked pretty well. So it didn't really sound overly rehearsed. Um, I thought it kind of turned into more of a conversation than just me lecturing. So I thought that was a good approach that I took. I think media literacy is extremely important to my major. I'm a communication major. The study of media and being able to critique media and the different forms of it is essential to be able to, do the papers I'm doing, the projects I do, and just understand kind of my education in general. I think for my future, media literacy education and my understanding of it is vital for me. Having the ability to, you know, research different things and be able to understand, the different biases that exist, how to kind of look up the sources of articles, and kind of how to take everything at face value and not, necessarily full-heartedly believe everything out of hand. As somebody that wants to pursue a career maybe in politics or social activism, I think it's incredibly important for me to be able to have that ability to think critically and decipher. I think my biggest takeaway from the project was the lack of media literacy knowledge amongst the people that I interviewed and just the people in general from what I was able to kind of gather. What I learned about media literacy is just how incredibly important it is in modern society. The ability to not take everything at face value, to dig deeper, have the ability to read an article and then look at the sources and kind of find the inherent bias, having the ability to realize that everything is put out for a reason, and trying to understand better what those reasons are. That everything that's produced is produced generally to make a profit. In terms of media literacy lessons, I would say I learned that there aren't very many. In terms of children, I think the biggest thing I learned is how important it is that we start teaching our kids media literacy, and teaching them the ability to, sift through information, because now, pretty much every kid has a smartphone. So having the ability to read the things on their phone and not just believe everything they read, have the ability to figure out, what sources that the articles are using and things of that nature, how to protect themselves online, how to not take unnecessary risks. I think all of that stuff would kind of correlate with media literacy. I've mentioned it a few times, but I think one of the things that really surprised me is that the lack of media literacy education available, for people in Kenosha County, in southeastern Wisconsin. Honestly, I was not able to find a whole lot, as I've mentioned previously. I think that kind of surprised me. I expected, in this how connected we are as a world, that there would be more resources for parents to use. I think all of the communication department learning goals would apply to this project in particular. But the two I felt connected the most with media literacy were research and messages. And the reason I felt that is because, research applies because media literacy gives us the skills to ask and answer meaningful questions, to do research, honestly. Media literacy gives you the ability to enhance your research, to make you a better researcher. And then the second one I went with was messages. And the reason I went with messages is because media literacy gives us the skills to critique messages, from different forms of media, whether it's a book, television, a newspaper, magazine, online publication, whatever it may be. It gives media literacy education gives us the understanding of how to critique that, how to look deeper, how to see the inherent bias in different pieces. But to close it out, I really think that this project gave me invaluable experience in terms of not only teaching media literacy, but also understanding, the baseline of knowledge of media literacy, kind of in our community. I interviewed people of different ages, different backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, that hold different positions currently, people that are involved in education, and somebody that was involved in the library. And I was able to find that a lot of them had some knowledge of media literacy, but a lot of them also did not have an advanced knowledge. Um, as I mentioned, one of my interviewees had never heard the term media literacy specifically until I reached out to her. So I found that very interesting. But I think my biggest takeaway is just how important it is that we move, um, in our education system, to start teaching media literacy, make it mandatory to be taught, um, maybe from fifth grade on, sixth grade on, middle school on. Um, I feel like if we want our kids to be able to have the knowledge, to research different topics, to read everyday articles, and just be able to, find the bias, find the messages that are being sent, better understand why the messages are being sent, who's paying for that message to be sent. If we want our kids to be able to do that, I feel like we have to have media literacy in our education system. And it can't be something that's casually mentioned. I feel like it's something that needs to be to be mentioned often, and maybe in several classes. I don't necessarily think that you can teach media literacy specifically in one class. I feel like, for me personally, I think the most beneficial thing would be to kind of mention in every class, because it applies. You could mention it in math class related to, I know one of my interviewees had mentioned how it could relate to graphs and the information that's pulled from graphs. Obviously, it could be taught in an English course, when you're mentioning research papers and things of that nature, how to look for sources, how to determine what sources are credible. I think that applies in history as well. When you're writing history papers, I feel like it applies. Science, same thing. When you're looking at data sets, where does that data come from? Who's paying for that data? Who's paying for the study to be done? I think you can apply it in pretty much every course. And I think that would give, students the ability to know how to apply it differently, how it's an everyday occurrence. Media literacy is invaluable because the media is everywhere. It's on our phones, it's on our iPads, it's on TV, it's in a book, it's everywhere. Um, so I think that the biggest takeaway for me for this project is that media literacy needs to be involved in our education. It needs to be taught, and kids need to have a better understanding of media literacy, because I had never heard the term until I got to college, and I wish I had heard it earlier.